You're opening a restaurant? Oh, honey, don't you think that's a bit ambitious for someone who burned Thanksgiving turkey twice? My mother's words from 3 weeks ago still echoed in my head as I stood in my empty kitchen at 2 in the morning, unable to sleep, thinking about the invitations I'd sent to my family for the grand opening of Harvest Moon. I'm Rebecca Chen, though everyone calls me Becca, and at 32 years old, I've finally done what I've dreamed about since I was 20 years old, washing dishes at an upscale steakhouse for $9 an hour. I've opened my own restaurant. The comment about the turkey was typical of my mother Ellen, always ready with a reminder of my failures, always comparing me unfavorably to my older brother David, the golden child, the corporate lawyer who at 35 had just made junior partner at his firm. My father Richard never contradicts her, just nods along or stays silent, and my younger sister Amy, 28 and recently engaged, has learned to follow their lead, treating me like the family disappointment, even though I've worked harder than any of them could imagine. For 12 years, I've been in the Portland food scene, starting as that dishwasher and working my way up through every station: prep cook, line cook, eventually sous chef, learning from everyone who would teach me, taking every shift I could get, saving every possible dollar. I lived in a studio apartment that cost $600 a month, didn't take vacations, didn't buy new clothes, didn't do anything except work and save because I had a vision. Harvest Moon, a farm-to-table contemporary American restaurant with Asian fusion influences, a reflection of my Chinese heritage blended with Pacific Northwest ingredients and techniques. I saved $85,000 over those 12 years, then took out a bank loan for another $120,000 to lease and renovate a beautiful 1920s building in downtown Portland that used to be a pharmacy, 2,500 square feet with gorgeous bones and huge windows. The invitations I sent to my family were printed on expensive cardstock, $75 for a set of 50, and I wrote personal notes to each of them: Mom, Dad, David and his girlfriend Sarah, Amy and her boyfriend Chris, telling them how much it would mean to have them there for the grand opening gala on Friday, September 29th, 2023. When I called my mother to make sure she'd received hers, her response was lukewarm at best. "Yes, dear, we got it. It's very nice. We'll try to make it." And I heard in those words the same dismissiveness I'd heard my entire life, but I pushed down the familiar sinking feeling and told myself that this time would be different. That when they saw what I'd built, when they saw the beautiful dining room with its warm wood and Edison lighting and open kitchen, when they tasted the food I'd spent months perfecting, they would finally see me as successful, as worthy, as enough. I remember being 10 years old, standing in the gymnasium of Bridgewater Elementary School with my volcano science project that had taken me 3 weeks to build, the one that actually erupted with perfect timing and earned me first place in the 5th grade division, scanning the crowd of parents for my mom and dad, and feeling my excitement curdle into something cold and heavy when I realized they weren't there. They'd gone to David's baseball game instead, a game where he sat on the bench the entire time, didn't play a single inning, but he was there in his uniform, and that was enough for them to choose it over my moment. When they came home that evening, I showed them my blue ribbon, and my mother said, "That's wonderful, sweetie," without looking up from unloading the dishwasher, and my father said, "David's team won, did you hear?" And that was all we said about my first place finish. 6 years later, when I was 16 and had just started getting serious about cooking, I planned an elaborate birthday dinner for my parents' anniversary, spent my own money from my part-time job at the library on ingredients, made coq au vin and roasted vegetables and a chocolate soufflé from scratch, set the table with candles and flowers, worked for 6 hours to make everything perfect. My mother critiqued every course, said the chicken was a bit dry, the vegetables were under-seasoned, the soufflé was good, but not as good as the one we'd had at Maison Pierre for David's birthday last month. And I remembered that dinner, remembered how they'd spent $200 on a meal at Portland's best French restaurant to celebrate David turning 19. And here I'd made dinner with my own hands and money and it was reduced to unfavorable comparison. College was when the pattern became impossible to ignore. I got into Portland State University's culinary arts program with a partial scholarship that covered $18,000 of the annual $24,000 cost, which meant I needed to come up with $6,000 a year plus living expenses, so I worked 3 jobs, library, coffee shop, and weekend catering gigs, to pay my way through. David went to Georgetown Law School, where tuition was $60,000 a year, and my parents paid every penny, said it was an investment in his future, said law school was different from culinary school, said he needed to focus on his studies, not work. When I graduated at 22 with honors and received the Dean's Award for Culinary Excellence, my parents came to the ceremony but arrived 30 minutes late. Missed my name being called, left immediately after to get back for some commitment I can't even remember now, didn't stay for the reception where my instructors told me I had real talent, that I could go far. For David's graduation 2 years earlier, they'd taken a 4-day trip to Washington, D.C., attended every event, took him to dinner at the inn at Little Washington, posed for hundreds of photos. The financial disparity was even more stark. When David graduated law school and got his first associate position, my parents gave him $50,000 as a launching gift to furnish his apartment and build his professional wardrobe and have a financial cushion. When I graduated culinary school, they gave me $500 with a card that said, "To help out," and my mother mentioned that culinary school was so much shorter than law school, as if that justified the 100-to-1 ratio. Then there was Mark, my fiancé when I was 27, a line cook I'd met at the restaurant where I was working my way up, and when I brought him to family dinner to announce our engagement, my mother looked at the simple ring, a small sapphire, all Mark could afford, and said, "Well, at least someone thinks you're special." And I heard in those words what she really meant, that she was surprised anyone wanted to marry me at all. When Mark and I broke up 8 months later after I discovered he'd been sleeping with one of the servers, my mother's response wasn't comfort, but vindication. "Probably for the best, Rebecca. You're not really the marrying type anyway. You're so focused on work. Men need attention." Each of these moments had built on the last, year after year, creating a foundation of hurt that I kept trying to overcome through achievement, kept thinking that if I just accomplished enough, proved myself enough, worked hard enough, they would finally see me as valuable, as worthy of the same pride and attention and financial support and presence they gave David, without him even having to ask. I spent 4 years in therapy learning to name this pattern, learning words like golden child and scapegoat and conditional love, understanding intellectually that their treatment of me said everything about them and nothing about my actual worth, but understanding something intellectually and feeling it emotionally are different things entirely. And I couldn't quite kill the hope that this restaurant, this tremendous achievement, might finally be the thing that made them see me. My real professional journey started when I was 20 years old and answered an ad for a dishwasher position at Clarkson's, an upscale steakhouse in downtown Portland that catered to business executives and anniversary couples, the kind of place where entrees started at $45 and the wine list ran 20 pages deep. I needed money desperately. I was taking community college classes and living in a basement studio that cost $550 a month, trying to figure out what I wanted to do with my life, and the job paid $11 an hour, which was $2 above minimum wage at the time, so I took it without knowing it would change everything. I worked nights, 10 p.m. to 6 a.m., scrubbing pots and pans that weighed more than I did, loading industrial dishwashers, mopping floors, taking out garbage that smelled like old meat and sour wine, and I loved it because I was surrounded by food, by the controlled chaos of a professional kitchen, by the shouting and the precision and the artistry of it all. After 3 months, the prep cook quit, and the head chef, Michael Torres, a 40-year-old man who'd trained in San Francisco and New York and had come to Portland to open Clarkson's 5 years earlier, asked if I wanted to try prep work, and I said yes before he finished the sentence. He taught me knife skills, taught me how to brunoise vegetables into perfect tiny cubes, how to break down a whole chicken in 90 seconds, how to make stocks that were so rich and flavorful they were the foundation of everything else. And he saw something in me that I didn't see in myself yet, told me after 6 months that I had natural instincts, that I understood flavor and balance in a way that couldn't really be taught. I enrolled in Portland State's Culinary Arts program when I was 21, went to classes during the day and worked at Clarkson's at night, slept 4 or 5 hours and lived on coffee and adrenaline, and by the time I was 23, I'd moved up to line cook, working the grill station during dinner service, responsible for every steak and chop that went out to the dining room. Michael kept mentoring me, kept pushing me, kept telling me I could be great if I was willing to work for it. And I was willing because cooking was the first thing in my life that felt like mine, that felt like something I was genuinely good at independent of anyone's approval or comparison to David. By 28, I was sous chef at Clarkson's, second in command in a kitchen that served 300 covers on a busy Saturday night, managing a team of 12 cooks, creating specials, ordering from suppliers, basically running the kitchen when Michael wasn't there, making $62,000 a year, which was more money than I'd ever imagined earning. Then 2 years ago, when I was 30, I was catering a private event at a tech executive's home in the West Hills, a dinner party for 20 people where I'd designed a custom menu and was cooking on-site with 2 assistants, and the host, a man named David Chen, who'd sold his startup for $80 million, told me as I was plating the final dessert course that I was the best chef in Portland, that my food was better than anything he'd had at the city's most acclaimed restaurants, and he asked why I didn't have my own place. I told him I was saving up, that it was the dream, and he looked at me seriously and said that talent like mine shouldn't be waiting, that I should find a way to make it happen soon, because Portland needed more chefs willing to take risks and create something new, and something about his certainty, his conviction that I was good enough, made the dream feel suddenly possible, urgently necessary. I started saving even more aggressively, moved from my one-bedroom apartment that cost $1,200 a month to a studio for $600, stopped going out, stopped buying anything that wasn't essential, put away every dollar I could, and within a year, I'd saved $60,000 on top of the $25,000 I already had. I found the location almost by accident, walking through Northwest Portland on my day off, and seeing a for lease sign in the window of a beautiful 1920s building that used to be a pharmacy, 2,500 square feet with original wood floors and tin ceilings and huge windows that let in floods of natural light. And I called the number on the sign and met with the owner, Mrs. Delacroix, an 82-year-old widow whose husband had owned the building for 40 years. She interviewed me over tea in her home, asked about my vision, my experience, my values, and when I described Harvest Moon, farm-to-table contemporary American with Asian fusion influences, a celebration of Pacific Northwest ingredients through the lens of my Chinese heritage, a place where every dish would tell a story about connection and memory and innovation. Her eyes filled with tears, and she said her late husband would have loved it, that she'd been waiting for the right person to take over the space, and she offered me a 5-year lease at $4,500 a month, which was below market rate for the location. I spent 9 months renovating with my friend Lavish, a contractor I'd met years earlier who gave me a fair price and let me do much of the non-specialist work myself to save money. I painted walls, refinished floors, installed light fixtures, built shelving, worked 12-hour days covered in dust and paint and sweat, transforming the empty shell into my vision. Warm, reclaimed wood tables, Edison bulb lighting, an open kitchen so diners could watch us cook, a bar with locally made tiles, cream-colored walls with black and white photos of Pacific Northwest farms and fishing boats, seating for 65. I spent 3 months developing the menu, testing and retesting 15 signature dishes until each one was exactly right. The miso-glazed black cod with forbidden rice and baby bok choy that represented my heritage and my home, Oregon duck breast with huckleberry gastrique, Columbia River King salmon with matsutake mushroom broth, grass-fed beef tenderloin with truffle butter and roasted root vegetables, house-made pasta with seasonal vegetables, and 8 other dishes that balanced innovation with approachability, that honored ingredients, that told stories. I hired a small team of talented people who believed in the vision. Marcus, a 27-year-old chef de cuisine who'd worked at 3 Michelin-starred restaurants in San Francisco and wanted to be part of something new. Yasmin, a 24-year-old pastry chef whose desserts were edible art, 3 line cooks, 2 servers, and James, a 30-year-old bartender who created a cocktail menu featuring local spirits and house-made syrups. My total investment was $205,000, my $85,000 in savings, plus a $120,000 bank loan that I'd have to pay back at 6% interest over 10 years, which meant monthly payments of $1,333 before I paid a single other expense. Everything I had and everything I could borrow riding on this venture, on my vision, on my belief that I could create something extraordinary. We did a soft opening 2 weeks before the official grand opening, invited friends and industry colleagues to work out any kinks in service, and it went perfectly. The food was exceptional, the timing was right, the atmosphere was exactly what I'd envisioned, and 3 local food critics who came wrote glowing preview coverage that made reservations start pouring in even before we officially opened. The grand opening gala was planned for Friday, September 29, 2023, and I invited everyone who mattered: food press, critics from Portland Monthly and Eater Portland and the Oregonian, industry colleagues, suppliers, the farmers I was partnering with, city officials, Michael Torres, of course, regular customers from my Clarkson's days who'd followed my career, and my family, because despite everything, despite the lifetime of dismissal and comparison and conditional love, I still hoped that when they saw what I'd built, when they tasted the food I'd created, when they stood in the beautiful space I'd transformed with my own hands and vision and relentless work, they would finally see me as successful, as worthy, as enough. Monday morning, the week before the grand opening, I called my mother with the kind of excitement I knew I should have learned by now to contain, but the preview coverage had just come out in Portland Monthly, and I'd spent the weekend watching reservation requests pour in, and I wanted so badly to share this with her, to hear pride in her voice, to finally have her see me as successful. She answered on the 4th ring, distracted, and I launched into telling her about the menu we'd finalized, about how the Portland Monthly critic had confirmed she was coming to the gala, about the beautiful flowers we were arranging with a local grower, about how everything was coming together even better than I'd dreamed. And there was a brief pause before she said, "That's nice, dear. Did I tell you David's firm is making him junior partner? Only 35 years old. Youngest junior partner in the firm's history. We're so proud we could burst." And just like that, the conversation had shifted away from my restaurant, away from my achievement, back to David where it always inevitably landed. I tried to redirect, said something about how I'd reserved a special table for the family, right by the window with the best view of the open kitchen, and my mother said, "Yes, yes, your little restaurant. We'll try to make it." And those words, little restaurant, and try to make it, not we'll be there, or we wouldn't miss it, settled into my stomach like cold stones. I felt that familiar sinking feeling, the one I'd felt at 10 and 16 and 22 and 27, the one that said I would never be enough, never achieve enough, never matter enough to warrant their full attention. But I pushed through it and said I really hoped they'd come because it meant a lot to me, and my mother said she had to go. She was meeting David's girlfriend Sarah for lunch to help her pick out an outfit for the junior partner celebration dinner. I hung up and sat in my office at Harvest Moon staring at the wall for 10 minutes. Tuesday I called my father separately, hoping he might be warmer, more enthusiastic, and he was, in his mild, distant way, saying, "Sounds great, Beck. Really great. You've worked so hard for this." And I felt a flutter of hope until he added, "Your mother has all the details, right? The time and address and everything?" which told me he hadn't retained a single piece of information from the formal invitation I'd sent 3 weeks ago, or from the reminder email I'd sent last week, or from any of the conversations I'd tried to have about this. Wednesday, I called Amy, my younger sister, the one I'd been closer to as children, before she'd learned that aligning with our parents' view of me was easier than standing apart, and she answered while clearly doing something else. I could hear traffic in the background, and when I mentioned the grand opening on Friday, she said, "Oh God, Friday? I think I have plans. Can't you just do a family dinner some other time?" And I had to explain that this wasn't a family dinner. This was the grand opening gala for my restaurant, the biggest night of my professional life, the culmination of 12 years of work and 2 years of planning and every dollar I'd saved. And she said, "It's kind of far though, Becca. That's like a 45-minute drive." And she lived in Beaverton, which was exactly 28 minutes from downtown Portland. I'd driven it 100 times, but distance was the excuse she was choosing to hide behind the truth that she simply didn't prioritize this, didn't prioritize me. Thursday, I called David directly. The first time I'd called him in probably 4 months because he never called me. Our relationship maintained entirely through family group chat and the occasional obligatory text. And his assistant answered saying he was in meetings. Would I like to leave a message? And I said just ask him to call me back. It's about this Friday. And he didn't call back Thursday. Didn't call back Friday morning. Finally called Friday afternoon at 2 o'clock, 3 days later, and said, "Hey, sis, yeah, restaurant thing. Look, I've got a client dinner Friday night. Important client, can't reschedule. Rain check?" And I wanted to scream that you couldn't rain check a grand opening, that it happened once, that I'd told him about this 6 weeks ago, that his client dinner could have been scheduled for literally any other night. But instead, I just said okay and hung up, because what else was there to say? Wednesday evening, with my hope dwindling but not yet dead, because hope is a stubborn thing that doesn't respond to evidence, I sent a final reminder to the family group chat. "Can't wait to see you all Friday at 7 p.m. Address, 342 Northwest Irving Street. Reserved the best table for family. Love you all." And I watched the responses come in over the next hour. My mother's thumbs up emoji that felt like a dismissal, Amy's heart emoji that meant nothing, David's complete silence, and my father's matching thumbs up. And I told myself it would be fine, that they'd show up, that the lukewarm responses were just their way, that when they walked into Harvest Moon and saw what I'd built, they'd understand, they'd finally see me. And I let myself believe that lie for 2 more days. Friday morning, I woke at 4:30 a.m. without an alarm, my body vibrating with a mixture of excitement and anxiety that made sleep impossible. And I drove through the dark, empty streets of Portland to Harvest Moon, arriving at 5 a.m. to a building that looked almost magical in the pre-dawn darkness. The streetlights casting warm pools of light on the sidewalk, and the large windows of my restaurant reflecting back my own face as I unlocked the door and stepped inside. The space was beautiful in the early morning quiet, the kind of beautiful that made my chest ache because I'd built this with my own hands and vision and relentless work. And the morning light was just beginning to filter through those big windows, touching the warm, reclaimed wood tables I'd refinished myself, the Edison bulb fixtures that hung at perfect heights, the cream-colored walls with their black and white photographs of Pacific Northwest farms and fishing boats, the open kitchen with its gleaming stainless steel equipment and organized stations, and I stood there for a full minute just taking it in, reminding myself that this was real, this was mine, this was happening. My team started arriving at 6 a.m., Marcus first with his knife roll and his quiet, focused energy, then Yasmin with her pastry boxes carefully packed, then the line cooks James and Sophia and Derek, then our servers Emma and Raj, and everyone moved with purpose and precision, because we all felt it, the significance of this night, the culmination of everything we'd been working toward since we'd opened the doors 2 weeks ago for the soft opening that had gone so perfectly, it had felt like a dream. Marcus started prepping the proteins, breaking down the whole Oregon duck breasts with their thick layer of fat that would render down to golden crispness, portioning the Columbia River King salmon into 6-ounce fillets with their deep orange flesh, trimming the locally sourced grass-fed beef tenderloin into perfect medallions, and I watched him work with the efficiency of someone who'd spent years in Michelin-starred kitchens and felt grateful that he'd believed enough in my vision to leave San Francisco and join this new venture. Yasmin was creating her desserts in the pastry section, and I kept glancing over to see the huckleberry panna cotta setting and individual ramekins, the honey lavender creme brulee ready for their sugar tops to be torched tableside, the dark chocolate torte with flaky sea salt that looked like edible architecture. And everything she made was art, the kind of beautiful, precise work that elevated the entire dining experience. I spent the morning working on my signature dish, the miso-glazed black cod with forbidden rice and baby bok choy, the dish that represented everything I was trying to do with Harvest Moon, the fusion of my Chinese heritage and Pacific Northwest ingredients, the balance of traditional technique and innovation, and I made the miso glaze from scratch, whisking together white miso paste in mirin and sake and brown sugar until it was smooth and glossy, tasting it and adjusting until the sweet, salty, umami balance was exactly right. By noon, everything was precisely organized, every station prepped and ready, every ingredient portioned and labeled, the dining room set with cream linens and small vases of local wildflowers that Emma had arranged that morning, and I told everyone to take a break, to go home and rest before we came back for the evening service. And I drove back to my studio apartment feeling the weight of the night ahead settling over me like a physical thing. I showered and stood in front of my closet looking at the emerald green silk dress I'd bought 3 weeks ago from a boutique in the Pearl District, the first expensive clothing purchase I'd made in years, $340 that had felt extravagant and terrifying when I'd handed over my credit card, but necessary because this was the grand opening of my restaurant, and I wanted to look like the successful chef and restaurateur I was trying to become. I did my makeup carefully, more than I usually wore, foundation and concealer to cover the dark circles from months of 4-hour sleep nights, eyeshadow in bronze tones that made my dark eyes stand out, mascara and eyeliner, lipstick in a deep rose color that felt sophisticated and professional, and when I looked at myself in the mirror, I saw someone who looked successful and confident and ready, and I let myself hope that when my family walked into Harvest Moon tonight and saw me like this, saw the restaurant I'd built, saw the food I'd created, they would finally see me as worthy of their pride and attention and love. I returned to the restaurant at 4 p.m. and did a final walkthrough, checking every table setting, every candle, every detail, and then I set up the reserved table by the window, the table with the best view of the open kitchen where diners could watch us cook, and I put out 6 place settings with handwritten place cards. Ellen and Richard for my parents, David and Sarah for my brother and his girlfriend, Amy and Chris for my sister and her boyfriend, and a 7th chair where I could sit when I had a moment between greeting guests and overseeing the kitchen. The place cards were cream cardstock with calligraphy I'd paid a local artist $60 to do, and I'd agonized over whether that was too much to spend, but decided it was worth it because I wanted everything to be perfect, wanted my family to see that I'd thought of every detail, that I'd reserved them the best table in the house, that they mattered to me even if I'd never quite seemed to matter to them. Guests started arriving at 6:30 p.m. The food critics from Portland Monthly and Eater Portland and the Oregonian, the journalists from local food blogs and city magazines, chef colleagues from other restaurants who I'd worked with over the years, or competed against in cooking competitions, or simply respected from afar, suppliers and farmers I'd partnered with who were as invested in Harvest Moon's success as I was, Mrs. Delacroix, the building owner who'd given me favorable lease terms because she believed in my vision, Luis, the contractor who'd helped me renovate this space and had become a genuine friend, and Michael Torres, my mentor who'd flown in from San Francisco where he was consulting for a new restaurant group, and every person who walked through the door felt like validation, like proof that I'd built something real and worthwhile. By 7 p.m., there were 60 people in the restaurant, the dining room humming with conversation and laughter and the clink of glasses, servers moving smoothly between tables with wine and cocktails from James's carefully crafted menu, and the family table by the window sat empty, all 6 place settings untouched, and I checked my phone for the 15th time in 30 minutes, and there were no messages, no texts saying they were running late, no calls apologizing for traffic, nothing, just silence. At 7:15, I forced myself to move through the dining room, smiling and greeting guests and accepting their congratulations, while my eyes kept drifting back to that empty table by the window, with its 6 untouched place settings and handwritten calligraphy place cards that had cost $60 and suddenly seemed like evidence of my own foolishness. The Portland Monthly Critic found me near the bar and grabbed my arm with genuine enthusiasm, saying the duck breast was the best she'd had in Portland in 5 years. Perfectly rendered fat, and the cherry gastrique was inspired, and I thanked her and felt a flush of pride that lasted exactly until I glanced back at the empty table and felt the hollow ache return to my chest. A local television crew arrived at 7:25, and their reporter, a young woman named Keisha, who'd covered the Portland food scene for 3 years, asked if she could do a brief interview about the opening, and I stood in front of their camera and talked about my vision for Harvest Moon and the importance of local sourcing and supporting Pacific Northwest farmers and fishermen, and I sounded confident and passionate and successful, and the entire time I was aware that my family wasn't there to see it, wasn't there to witness me being interviewed by local news, wasn't there to feel proud. Other guests kept approaching, people I'd worked with over the years, or whose restaurants I admired, and they'd shake my hand or hug me and say how beautiful the space was, how excited they were for me, how they'd known I had this in me, and someone would inevitably ask if I was expecting more people, gesturing to the conspicuously empty table in the prime location by the window, and I'd say, "Just some family, they're running late," with a smile that felt like it might crack my face, and I'd quickly redirect the conversation back to them, asking about their restaurant or their latest project, anything to move away from the question of who wasn't there. At 7:45, with my anxiety reaching a breaking point and my phone still showing no messages, I finally texted my mother, keeping it simple and non-accusatory. "Are you close? Saving your table." I watched the 3 dots appear and disappear several times over the next 20 minutes as she typed and deleted and retyped her response. And when it finally came through at 8:07, I was standing near the kitchen watching Marcus plate the miso black cod, and the words on my screen made me feel like I'd been punched in the stomach. "Oh, honey, we're not going to make it." David's client dinner ran long and we decided to join him. "Didn't we tell you? Congrats, though." I read it 3 times, standing there in my emerald green dress, in my dream restaurant surrounded by 60 successful, happy people who'd shown up to celebrate with me. And my family had chosen David's client dinner. Not an emergency or an illness or an unavoidable conflict, but an ordinary client dinner that David had known about for weeks. And they hadn't even called, hadn't even given me the courtesy of a phone conversation, just a text message with a party emoji, as if that somehow softened the blow. At 8:03, my phone buzzed again, and I looked down to see that Amy had posted on Instagram, not a message to me, but a public post, a photo of her and 3 friends at some trendy bar downtown holding cocktails, her caption reading, "Friday Vibes," with a string of celebratory emojis, and she was 28 minutes away from my restaurant, close enough that she could have stopped by even for 30 minutes. But she'd chosen drinks with friends instead, and she hadn't even bothered to lie about a conflict. Just publicly posted evidence that she'd simply chosen not to come. My father's text arrived at 8:30, separate from my mother's, and it said, "Sorry, Becca, got roped into David's thing. Will come for dinner soon. Proud of you." And those last 3 words felt like a slap, because how could he be proud of me when he wasn't proud enough to show up, when he'd been roped into supporting David instead of choosing to support me? And I stood there holding my phone and feeling the tears start to build behind my eyes, and knowing I couldn't let them fall, not here, not now, not in front of 60 guests, and my entire staff, who were working so hard to make this night perfect. Marcus appeared at my elbow, his dark eyes concerned, and he said quietly, "Chef, you okay?" And I nodded automatically, professionally. The way I'd learned to nod through 12 years of kitchen work when I was burned or cut or exhausted beyond measure. And I said, "I just need a minute," and excused myself through the kitchen, past the line where Sophia and Derek and James were working in synchronized precision, past Yasmin's pastry station where perfect huckleberry panna cottas waited in rows, and into the walk-in cooler where I stood among the hanging sides of beef and boxes of produce, and let the 40-degree air shock my system, standing there for 3 full minutes breathing the cold, sterile air and letting it freeze away the tears that were threatening to come, because this was my night, the biggest night of my professional life, and I would not let their absence ruin it, even though it hurt in a way I hadn't fully prepared myself for, despite knowing deep down that they probably wouldn't come, that they never really came when it mattered. I came back out of the walk-in cooler with my face composed and my professional mask firmly in place, and I threw myself into hosting with the kind of fierce determination that had gotten me through 12 years of kitchen work, moving through the dining room and checking on tables and accepting compliments about the food and the space and thanking people for coming. And the evening was genuinely successful in every measurable way. Guests were loving the miso black cod and the duck breast and Yasmin's huckleberry panna cotta. 3 different people stopped me to say they were already planning to come back next week and asking how to make reservations. The critic from Eater Portland found me near the bar around 8:45 and asked if I'd be available for a longer interview next month for a feature piece they were planning. And I said yes and thanked her, and felt that flush of professional validation that should have filled me completely, but somehow only filled part of me, because the other part kept looking at that empty table by the window with its 6 untouched place settings and cream napkins folded into perfect triangles and handwritten place cards that now felt like evidence of my own foolishness, like a monument to my naive hope that this time would be different, that this achievement would finally be significant enough to matter to them. Around 9 o'clock, Michael Torres found me standing near the kitchen, watching Marcus plate another order of the black cod, and he touched my elbow gently and said, "Becca," in that quiet voice he used when he knew something was wrong. And I turned to him and saw the concern in his dark eyes, and the way he was looking at me, like he could see straight through my professional facade, and I said quietly, just loud enough for him to hear over the dining room noise, "They didn't come." And he nodded once, not surprised because he'd known my family for 12 years, had heard the stories, had seen the pattern, and he didn't offer empty comfort or platitudes about how they probably had a good reason or how I shouldn't take it personally. He just said, "Their loss, Becca. This place is extraordinary. You're extraordinary." And something about the simplicity of those words and the genuine conviction in his voice cracked something open in my chest that I'd been holding carefully closed all evening, and I felt the tears start to build again behind my eyes, and knew I couldn't let them fall here, in the middle of my dining room, surrounded by 60 successful, happy people who were celebrating my achievement. I excused myself and walked quickly through the kitchen, where my team was working in beautiful, synchronized precision, past the line and the prep stations and Yasmin's pastry corner, and into my office, the small room off the back of the kitchen that was barely more than a closet, with a desk and a filing cabinet and a small bookshelf. And I sat down in my desk chair and finally let myself cry for 5 minutes. Real crying with tears running down my face, and my shoulders shaking, and my breath coming in gasps, grieving not just tonight, but all the nights and days and years of dismissal and casual cruelty and being overlooked and undervalued by the people who were supposed to love me most. After 5 minutes, I made myself stop and looked around my small office at the evidence of my journey that I'd hung on the walls. The framed first dollar I'd earned at Clarkson's that Michael had given me as a gift when I left to open Harvest Moon. The photograph of me and Michael at my sous chef promotion dinner 4 years ago, both of us grinning and holding champagne glasses. My culinary school diploma from Portland Culinary Institute that I'd earned while working 3 jobs. The original pencil sketch of the restaurant layout I'd drawn 2 years ago on a napkin when the dream was just beginning to take shape. And I realized that this office and this restaurant and this entire achievement was something I'd built without them, without their support or encouragement or belief, that I'd done this alone and it was real and valuable and mine. And maybe that was actually the point. Maybe the fact that I'd built something this significant without their help was more meaningful than if they'd been supportive all along. I washed my face in the small bathroom attached to my office and reapplied my makeup carefully and checked myself in the mirror and saw that my eyes were slightly red, but not obviously so. And I walked back out into the dining room and stayed until the last guest left at 11:30, shaking hands and accepting congratulations and thanking people for coming and meaning it, because despite the ache in my chest, I was genuinely grateful that 60 people had shown up to celebrate with me, even if the 6 people I'd wanted most hadn't bothered. After the last guest left, my team gathered in the dining room, and Marcus produced a bottle of champagne, a good one that cost $85 that he'd brought from his own collection, and we opened it and poured glasses for everyone, and Marcus raised his glass and said, "To Chef Becca and Harvest Moon, the best new restaurant in Portland, and the best chef I've ever worked for." And everyone cheered and clinked glasses and drank, and they were proud and exhausted and triumphant, and they didn't know about my family not showing up, and I was grateful for that, grateful that I could share this pure moment of success with them without the shadow of that absence. I woke up Saturday morning in my studio apartment to the buzzing of my phone on the nightstand, and for one disoriented moment I thought maybe it was my family calling to apologize or explain. But when I reached for it, I saw it was notifications from Google Alerts I'd set up for Harvest Moon. And I sat up in bed and started reading through them with my heart pounding. And the first one was from Portland Monthly, and when I clicked through, I saw the review was already posted online, even though it was only 7 in the morning. And the critic, Karen Davidson, who'd raved about the duck breast the night before, had written, "Harvest Moon announces the arrival of Portland's most exciting culinary voice in years. Chef Rebecca Chen's fusion approach transcends trend, creating something genuinely new and delicious. Her miso-glazed black cod with forbidden rice is transcendent, perfectly balancing the umami richness of the miso with the delicate flesh of the fish, while her Oregon duck breast with cherry gastrique shows technical precision that would make French-trained chefs envious. Don't miss this restaurant. Chef Chen is the real deal." I read it 3 times. Then I saw there was already a review posted on Eater Portland from their critic who'd asked for the interview, and she'd written, "The best new restaurant opening of 2023, hands down, Harvest Moon is a must-visit." And then I started seeing posts from local food bloggers and Instagram food accounts, and they were all glowing, all excited, all calling Harvest Moon an instant classic. And when I checked the reservation system on my phone, I saw that bookings were flooding in, people reserving tables for the next 3 weeks, and my restaurant was a verified hit by every measurable standard, and I should have felt pure, unfiltered joy. But instead there was this ache sitting in my chest like a stone, because the people whose approval I'd spent 32 years chasing hadn't even bothered to show up to witness it. I made coffee and sat on my small couch looking out the window at Portland's gray October sky and told myself that their absence didn't diminish my achievement, that the critical acclaim and the packed reservation book and the success of last night were real and valuable, regardless of whether my family acknowledged them. But the truth was, it still hurt in a deep, aching way that I couldn't quite reason myself out of. And I was sitting there drinking my second cup of coffee around 2 in the afternoon, still in my pajamas because I'd given myself the day off after working 14-hour days for 2 straight months, when my phone rang and I saw it was my mother calling, and I sat there for 4 rings debating whether to answer before I finally picked up. Her voice was bright and casual, like we were just having a normal Saturday catch-up call, and she said, "Hi, honey, how did your opening go last night?" as if she'd had some unavoidable conflict instead of making a deliberate choice to attend David's client dinner instead, as if her absence was just one of those things that happens rather than a decision she'd made. And I felt anger rising in my throat, but I kept my voice level and said, "It went well, Mom. We got excellent reviews this morning." And she said, "Oh, that's wonderful, sweetie. See, you didn't even need us there. You did great all by yourself. You know how these work things are with David. That client his firm is courting is worth millions, and they really needed to make a good impression. It was important for his career." And I heard myself say quietly, "You chose a client dinner over my grand opening." And there was a long silence on the other end of the line before my mother's voice came back irritated and slightly defensive, saying, "Don't be dramatic, Rebecca. We'll come to your restaurant another time. It's not like this was your only night of business. And you have to understand that David's career is at a crucial point right now. He's being considered for junior partner, and these relationship-building dinners are essential." And I said, "So is mine, Mom. My career is at a crucial point too." And she made this dismissive sound, almost a laugh, and said, "It's different though, honey. David is a corporate lawyer at a major firm. It's a restaurant." And the way she said that word, restaurant, with that slight downturn in her voice like it was something quaint or cute or fundamentally less serious than David's work, crystallized something for me, brought into sharp focus the dismissiveness that had colored every interaction we'd had about my career for the past 12 years. And I felt this clarity arriving like cold water, washing away the hurt and leaving something harder and cleaner behind. And I said, "I have to go, Mom. We're busy with prep for tonight's service," which wasn't true since I'd given my team the day off too, and I hung up before she could respond. And I sat there on my couch with my phone in my hand, feeling my heart racing and my hands shaking slightly, but also feeling something that might have been the very beginning of freedom. The next 2 weeks after that phone call with my mother became a blur of relentless work and slowly building success. And I threw myself into Harvest Moon with the kind of fierce intensity that left no room for thinking about my family or their absence or the way my mother had dismissed my career as just a restaurant. And every night we were fully booked with reservations extending further and further into the future. And by the end of the first week of October, I had to hire 2 more servers because we were consistently seating 65 covers per night, and my original team of 2 servers couldn't handle the volume. And then I hired another line cook because Marcus and the team were getting overwhelmed with the ticket times, and the reviews kept coming in waves, all of them positive, all of them using words like innovative and exceptional and must visit. And on October 12th, the James Beard Foundation's weekly newsletter included a small mention of Harvest Moon in their new Restaurants to Watch section, calling me a chef who bears watching as she develops her unique Pacific Northwest Asian fusion voice. And 3 days after that, I got an email from an editor at Food and Wine magazine asking if I'd be interested in being featured in their spring issue in a roundup of the next generation of American chefs. And I said yes to everything, every interview request, and every media opportunity, and every chance to talk about my food and my vision, because this was what I'd worked for, this validation from people who understood cuisine and craft, and the years of dedication it took to develop a culinary point of view. I was working 14-hour days, arriving at the restaurant at 9 in the morning to receive deliveries from my network of local farmers and foragers, and staying until midnight after the last guest left, and the kitchen was cleaned and prepped for the next day, and late at night, I would sit alone in the empty dining room with just the Edison bulbs casting their warm glow over the tables, and I would look around at what I'd built and feel this profound sense of accomplishment, mixed with an ache that wouldn't quite dissolve because my family still hadn't visited, not once in 2 weeks of operation, and the family group chat that I hadn't left yet but had muted continued its flow of messages about David's cases and Amy's wedding planning and my father's golf games. And once my mother had sent a text saying, "We should make a reservation at your place for your father's birthday next month, November 15th, table for 4." And I had stared at that message for a long time, At the casual way she phrased it, we should make a reservation at your place. Like Harvest Moon was just a convenient venue rather than my life's work. Like she wanted to use my restaurant as a setting for celebrating someone else, rather than coming to celebrate me or support me or even just to see what I'd created. And I hadn't responded to that text, and she hadn't followed up. Then on Wednesday evening, October 18th, 3 weeks to the day after my grand opening, I was in the kitchen doing prep work for the evening service, breaking down a whole Columbia River king salmon that had been delivered that morning, and teaching one of my newer line cooks the proper technique for removing the pin bones, when Marcus came back from the dining room and said, "Chef, there's someone here asking for a table, says she doesn't have a reservation, but wondered if we have any space at the bar." And I wiped my hands on my apron and said I'd handle it, because we did have 2 seats open at the bar, and I liked to personally seat walk-ins when I could. It was good for building regular customer relationships. And when I walked out into the dining room, I saw a woman in her late 50s, standing near the host stand, well dressed in dark slacks and a silk blouse, looking around the restaurant with the kind of focused attention that made me think she was evaluating everything she saw. And when I approached her and introduced myself, she extended her hand and said, "Margaret Lawson, I'm the editor of Pacific Coast Dining magazine. I've been hearing quite a bit of buzz about Harvest Moon, and I happened to be in Portland for meetings today and thought I'd see if I could get a table." And I felt my heart jump because Pacific Coast Dining was a major regional food publication with a circulation of over 200,000 readers across Oregon, Washington, and Northern California. And having their editor show up unannounced was both terrifying and thrilling. I seated Margaret personally at the bar, where she'd have a view of the open kitchen and could watch the controlled chaos of service. And she ordered the full tasting menu, all 7 courses, and I told Marcus I would personally prepare every dish for her table. And for the next 90 minutes, I cooked with absolute focus and precision, plating each course exactly as I'd envisioned it. The miso black cod with its perfect caramelized glaze, and the forbidden rice, and the baby bok choy arranged just so. The duck breast sliced to reveal the perfect pink interior with the cherry gastrique pooled artfully beside it. Yasmin's huckleberry panna cotta with its delicate wobble, and the candied huckleberries on top. And I watched from the kitchen as Margaret tasted each dish, as she made notes in a small leather notebook, as she photographed several of the courses with her phone. And when she finished her meal, she caught my eye and gestured to ask if I had a moment to talk. And I met her in my small office where she sat in the chair across from my desk and said, "Rebecca, that was an exceptional meal. Truly remarkable, and I'd like to propose something to you." She explained that Pacific Coast Dining did a major cover story each spring, focusing on one chef who was redefining their regional food scene. That it included an extensive profile piece, a professional photo shoot, and interviews about culinary philosophy and vision. And she said, "I want you to be our spring cover story. The focus would be the chef who's redefining Portland dining. And we do the whole package. Photo shoot here at Harvest Moon, deep dive interview, the works." And I sat there stunned because this was beyond anything I'd imagined. A cover story in a major regional food magazine just 3 weeks after opening. And before I could fully process that, Margaret continued, "There's something else. We run an annual Rising Star Chef Award. It's given to one chef across the Pacific Coast region who demonstrates exceptional talent and promise in their first 3 years of running their own kitchen. The winner is announced at our gala in December and receives a $25,000 grant, plus extensive media coverage and industry recognition. And I want to nominate you for this year's award." I managed to say yes to both the cover story and the nomination, my voice sounding distant to my own ears. And after Margaret left with promises to be in touch about scheduling the interview and photo shoot, I sat alone in my office for 10 minutes, just breathing. And then I called Michael because he was the first person I wanted to tell. And when he answered, I said, "Michael, Pacific Coast Dining wants to do a cover story on me, and they're nominating me for their Rising Star Chef Award." And he let out a whoop of joy so loud I had to hold the phone away from my ear. And then he said, "Becca, you're going to win that award. I know it. I can feel it. This is your moment." And we talked for 15 minutes about what this meant and how proud he was and how much I deserved this recognition. And after we hung up, I sat there with my phone in my hand and I wanted to call my family, wanted to share this incredible news with my mother and father and siblings, wanted to hear them express pride and excitement. But I remembered my mother's dismissive, "It's a restaurant," and the way none of them had bothered to visit in 3 weeks, and the casual way she'd suggested using my restaurant for my father's birthday dinner. And I put my phone down and didn't call them, and that small act of restraint felt like both a loss and a victory. Over the next month, through the entirety of October and into the first week of November, I worked with Margaret Lawson on the profile piece for Pacific Coast Dining's spring issue, and the process was both exhilarating and deeply reflective in ways I hadn't anticipated, because Margaret asked questions that forced me to articulate things about my cooking and my journey that I'd never put into words before. The interview itself took place on a Tuesday afternoon at Harvest Moon, during the quiet hours between lunch prep and dinner service. And we sat at one of the tables by the window, with afternoon light streaming in, while Margaret recorded our conversation on her phone, and took notes in that same leather notebook she'd had when she first visited. And for 3 hours we talked about my culinary philosophy, my approach to fusion cuisine, my commitment to local sourcing and seasonal ingredients, and the deeper why behind everything I did in the kitchen. I found myself being more honest than I'd planned, telling her about starting as a dishwasher at Clarkson's when I was 20 years old, about working 3 jobs through culinary school at Portland State, about saving $85,000 over the course of a decade by living in a tiny studio apartment and never taking vacations and saying no to almost everything that wasn't directly related to my goal of opening my own restaurant. And Margaret listened with this intense focus that made me feel like my story mattered, like the details of my struggle and my persistence were worth documenting. When she asked about my fusion approach and how I developed my particular style of blending Pacific Northwest ingredients with Asian flavors and techniques, I told her about my grandmother, my mother's mother, who had emigrated from Guangdong province in China and who had died when I was 15, and how she'd been the one who taught me about the balance of flavors, about how a dish needed to have harmony between sweet and savory and sour and bitter and umami, and how some of my earliest food memories were of standing on a stool in her kitchen, watching her make dumplings or stir-fry bok choy or braise pork belly. And I realized as I was talking that I'd never connected those memories consciously to my cooking before, but they were absolutely foundational to how I thought about food. Margaret asked about my family, and I kept my answer carefully neutral, saying simply that I was self-made and that I'd built my career through my own work rather than through connections or financial support, and I didn't mention my mother's dismissiveness or my siblings' indifference or the fact that none of them had bothered to visit Harvest Moon in the month since it had opened, because I didn't want the profile to be about family dysfunction. I wanted it to be about the food and the restaurant and the vision I'd worked so hard to realize. The photo shoot happened the following week on a Wednesday morning, and Margaret brought a professional photographer named David Chen, no relation to me despite the shared last name, along with a styling team that included a makeup artist and someone whose job was apparently just to arrange food and props in aesthetically pleasing ways, and they spent 4 hours photographing me in various locations around the restaurant. There were shots of me in my chef whites working in the kitchen, my hands shown in close-up as I plated the miso black cod with its glossy glaze and the forbidden rice arranged just so, and the baby bok choy placed with precision, and shots of me standing at the chef's counter with the open kitchen visible behind me, and all the gleaming stainless steel and the organized chaos of a professional kitchen, and shots of me in the dining room during golden hour when the late afternoon light came through the large windows and made everything glow warm and soft. And in those photos I was wearing a simple black dress that the stylist had brought, and my hair was down instead of pulled back in my usual tight bun, and I looked like someone I barely recognized, someone confident and accomplished and powerful. The photographer kept saying, "You're a natural, the camera loves you, just relax and be yourself." and I tried to relax even though having that much attention focused on me felt deeply uncomfortable. But when they showed me the test shots on the camera's display screen, I saw what he meant. I looked like a real chef, like someone who belonged on the cover of a magazine, like the person I'd been working to become for 12 years had finally fully materialized. Meanwhile, the family group chat that I still hadn't left, but that I'd muted so I wouldn't get constant notifications, continued its steady stream of messages that had nothing to do with me. And one evening in late October, when I was lying in bed scrolling through my phone before sleep, I unmuted it briefly to see what I'd missed and found that Amy had announced her engagement to her boyfriend Chris, and the chat had exploded with excitement and congratulations, and my mother had sent approximately 40 messages about engagement party plans and wedding timelines, and wasn't this wonderful, and she'd always known Chris was the one. I scrolled through it all feeling strangely detached, and then I saw that I'd actually posted in the chat myself 6 days earlier a message that said, "Great news! I'm going to be on the cover of Pacific Coast Dining magazine in the spring. They're doing a feature profile on me and Harvest Moon." And I looked at the responses to that message and saw that my mother had replied 4 hours later with, "That's nice. Amy, what about December for your engagement party?" And that was it. That was the entire acknowledgement of what was actually a major professional achievement. And Amy hadn't responded to my news at all. And David had written "Cool sis" with no punctuation or elaboration, and my father had written "Congratulations, Becca," which was at least a complete sentence, but was followed immediately by him changing the subject back to Amy's engagement. I stared at that exchange for a long time, at the contrast between the explosion of enthusiasm for Amy's engagement and the barely there acknowledgement of my magazine cover, and I felt something hardening in my chest, some final small hope crystallizing into acceptance, and I muted the chat again and didn't look at it for the rest of the week. Mid-November arrived with the kind of crisp fall weather that made Portland feel magical, the trees along Northwest Irving Street turning gold and crimson. And on November 14th, Pacific Coast Dining magazine published their official announcement of the 5 nominees for the Rising Star Chef Award on their website and across all their social media platforms. And I was at Harvest Moon doing inventory in the walk-in cooler when Marcus came back with his phone held out saying, "Chef, you need to see this." And I looked at the screen to see my name listed alongside 4 other chefs, and the post had already gotten hundreds of likes and comments in the 30 minutes since it had gone up. The other nominees were accomplished chefs from major food cities: Thomas Chen from Seattle, who had no relation to me despite the shared surname, and who had 15 years of experience and owned 3 successful restaurants; Marie Dubois from Vancouver, who had trained at Le Cordon Bleu in Paris and worked in Michelin-starred kitchens across France before opening her own place; Carlos Mendoza from San Francisco, who was doing cutting-edge molecular gastronomy and was the protege of a James Beard award-winning chef; and Jessica Wu from San Diego, whose modern fusion approach had critics predicting she'd earn Michelin stars within 2 years. And looking at that list, I felt simultaneously honored to be included and completely out of my depth, because I was the only Portland chef nominated, and I'd only been open for 6 weeks, while these other chefs had years more experience and multiple restaurants or prestigious training, or both. Within hours, the announcement spread through Portland's food community like wildfire, and my phone started buzzing with congratulatory texts from other chefs and former colleagues and regular customers, and the local food blogs picked up the story, and by the next morning both the Oregonian and Willamette Week had published articles about my nomination with headlines like, "Portland chef Rebecca Chen, nominated for prestigious regional award," and "Harvest Moon's Chef Chen named Rising Star nominee," and my Instagram account gained 5,000 new followers in the span of a week. And the reservation waitlist for Harvest Moon extended all the way into late January, and I had to hire another host just to manage the phone calls and online booking requests. And 3 different investors reached out through my website contact form, asking if I was interested in discussing expansion opportunities or opening a second location, which I politely declined because it was far too soon, and I wanted to focus on making Harvest Moon the best it could be before even thinking about expansion. Then, on November 20th, 6 days after the nomination announcement, my mother called, and I was in my apartment for once, actually taking an afternoon off because Marcus had insisted I needed rest. And when I saw her name on my phone screen, I considered not answering, but some old habit made me pick up, and her voice was bright with an enthusiasm I hadn't heard directed at me in months, when she said, "Rebecca, we saw your name in the newspaper, rising star chef. Why didn't you tell us?" I felt my jaw tighten as I said, "I did tell you, Mom, in the family chat 6 days ago when the nomination was announced." And there was a pause before she said in that dismissive tone I knew so well, "Oh, I must have missed it. There's so much in that chat. Well, this is wonderful news. We're so proud of you. We really need to come see your restaurant. We keep meaning to." And I heard myself say with more edge than I'd intended, "You've had 2 months." And she made a small huffing sound and said, "We've been incredibly busy with Amy's engagement party planning. There's so much to coordinate. Speaking of which, the party is December 10th, Saturday evening. We'll need you to come early to help with setup, maybe around 3, and I was thinking you could make some appetizers for the party. You know those little dumpling things you do? It would save us some catering costs and give you a chance to contribute." I felt something shift in my chest, something that had been bending finally reaching its breaking point, and I said slowly, "Mom, December 10th is the award gala in San Francisco. That's the night they announce the Rising Star Chef winner." I told you about this, and my mother said without missing a beat, "Well, what time is your thing? The party doesn't start until 7. Could you do both?" And I said no, in a tone so flat and final that it surprised even me, the first time in my 32 years I'd said no to my mother that directly, without softening it or explaining or apologizing. There was a silence on the other end of the line, and then my mother's voice shifted, taking on that particular quality of surprise, mixed with irritation, that I'd heard countless times growing up whenever I didn't immediately comply with what she wanted, and she said, "It's your sister's engagement party, Rebecca." And I responded, "And it's potentially the biggest night of my professional life. I'll be in San Francisco at the gala." And my mother's voice rose slightly as she said, "You're choosing some award dinner over your own sister's engagement party? Over your family?" And I felt a strange calm settle over me as I said, "You chose David's client dinner over my grand opening. You taught me that career obligations take precedence over family events. I'm making the same choice you modeled for me." And the silence that followed was so complete, I could hear her breathing, and then her voice came back cold and clipped, in a way that used to make me want to apologize for existing, as she said, "You're being selfish, Rebecca." And I said, "Maybe I am. I'll send Amy and Chris a nice engagement gift." And I hung up before she could respond, my hands shaking but my heart feeling something that might have been freedom. The family group chat that I'd muted after hanging up on my mother exploded over the next 24 hours. And when I finally looked at it Sunday evening, after a particularly grueling dinner service at Harvest Moon, I found 43 messages waiting, a cascade of accusation and guilt and performative hurt that would have devastated me even a month earlier, but now just made me tired. Amy had sent the first message about an hour after my call with our mother, a long text that said, "I can't believe you're refusing to come to my engagement party, Becca. This is one of the most important days of my life, and my own sister won't be there. I've been there for all your stuff and supported you through everything, and this is how you treat me?" And I stared at that claim that she'd been there for all my stuff and supported me through everything, and felt something between anger and dark amusement because Amy hadn't visited Harvest Moon once in the 2.5 months since it had opened, hadn't come to my grand opening gala, had barely acknowledged my magazine cover beyond a thumbs-up emoji, and apparently, her version of being there for me consisted of existing in the same family group chat and occasionally liking my Instagram posts. David had chimed in a few hours later, with his characteristic ability to reduce my entire career to an inconvenience, when he wrote, "Come on, Becca, it's family. The award thing is just work. You can go to other work events, but Amy only gets engaged once, hopefully. And those 3 words, just work, sat in my chest like a stone. Because that's what it had always been to them. My 12 years of brutal hours and burned hands and exhaustion and slowly building expertise and the achievement of opening my own restaurant at 32 years old was just work, just my little hobby, just something that paled in importance next to David's law career or Amy's engagement or literally anything else they deemed worthy of attention. My father sent a private text directly to my number, rather than in the group chat, and his message said, "Becca, honey, can't you compromise? Your mother and sister are very upset. This award dinner is important, but family is family. Maybe you could fly down to San Francisco early Saturday morning and fly back in time for Amy's party. It starts at 7, so if your award thing is at lunch, you could make both." And I realized he genuinely had no idea that the gala was an evening event, that he hadn't retained a single detail about the biggest professional recognition of my life, that he was asking me to spend probably $1,000 on last-minute flights and destroy myself with travel stress to accommodate a party for Amy, who couldn't be bothered to drive 45 minutes to my restaurant opening. I responded to him, "I compromised my whole life. I'm not doing it this time." And then I went back to the group chat where my mother had sent her final salvo at nearly midnight Saturday night. "If you don't come to Amy's party, Rebecca, don't expect us to come to your award dinner either. You're making your priorities very clear, and we'll make ours clear too." I read that message 3 times, and then I did something I'd never done before in my entire life. I actually laughed out loud at my mother's attempt at manipulation. Laughed alone in my apartment with a sound that was half humor and half release. Because the threat that they wouldn't come to my award gala if I didn't come to Amy's engagement party was so absurd when they hadn't shown up for my grand opening, hadn't visited my restaurant, hadn't acknowledged my magazine cover with anything more than the briefest dismissal before returning to their preferred topics. And I typed back, "I didn't expect you anyway, Mom. You haven't shown up for anything yet." And then before I could second-guess myself, I clicked the options for the group chat and selected Leave Conversation and confirmed it. And just like that, the constant stream of their words and their dismissals and their casual cruelty was gone from my phone. The silence was immediate and profound and a little bit terrifying, because for 32 years I'd been watching that thread of family communication, waiting for scraps of approval or recognition, absorbing their priorities and their judgments and their clear message about my worth relative to my siblings, and now there was just quiet, just my own thoughts, just the absence of their voices in my daily life. I blocked the group chat notifications entirely so they couldn't add me back. And then I set my phone face down on my coffee table and sat on my couch feeling my hands shake with adrenaline and something that might have been grief, but also might have been freedom. And for the first time in as long as I could remember, I wasn't waiting for my family to see me. I wasn't hoping that the next achievement would finally be enough. I was just done. The week leading up to the gala passed in a strange bubble of focus and anticipation, and I threw myself into preparations at Harvest Moon while simultaneously trying to wrap my head around the fact that I was closing the restaurant for an entire weekend, Saturday and Sunday, the first time since we'd opened that we wouldn't be serving dinner. And Marcus kept assuring me that he and the team had everything under control for the light prep work they'd do on those days to get ready for Monday's reopening. On Thursday, December 8th, I packed a small suitcase and drove down to San Francisco, 5 hours on I-5 through the gray winter landscape of Southern Oregon and Northern California. And I checked into the Palace Hotel at 4 in the afternoon, a beautiful historic building in downtown San Francisco, where I'd splurged on a room that cost $425 per night for 2 nights. And I kept telling myself I deserved this, that I'd worked for 12 years for this kind of recognition, and I should celebrate it properly instead of trying to do it on the cheap. Friday, I gave myself permission to just enjoy the city, something I almost never did because taking time off felt like weakness or waste. But I walked through the Ferry Building Marketplace and looked at all the artisanal food vendors, ate oysters at the bar at Hog Island, wandered through Chinatown thinking about my grandmother and her immigration story that I barely knew because she died when I was 15, and I'd been too young to ask the right questions. And in the late afternoon, I went to the hotel spa and got a facial and a blowout that cost $280 and felt simultaneously extravagant and exactly right. Saturday morning, the day of the gala, I slept until 9, which was practically unheard for me, and I woke to a text from Michael that said, "Today's your day, you're going to win. I feel it in my bones." And texts from Marcus and Yasmin and James that all said variations of, "Good luck, chef," and "You've got this." And I lay in the hotel bed looking at those messages from my chosen family, my restaurant family, the people who showed up, and I felt grateful in a way that made my chest ache. I spent Saturday morning in that beautiful hotel room doing absolutely nothing, which felt revolutionary for someone who'd worked 14-hour days for the past 2.5 months, and I ordered room service breakfast at 9:30, which arrived on a pristine white-clothed cart with silver domes covering perfectly poached eggs and sourdough toast and fresh berries that probably cost $45, but I didn't even look at the bill, just signed it and ate slowly while looking out the window at San Francisco's skyline. Around noon, I finally got up and showered, taking my time under the hot water, and then I started the process of getting ready for the gala, which felt both exciting and surreal, because this was actually happening. I was actually going to this black tie event as a nominee for one of the most prestigious regional culinary awards. Me, the girl who'd started as a dishwasher 12 years ago. The gala was scheduled to start at 6 o'clock at the Regency Ballroom, and it was black tie, formal in a way that my life almost never was, since my usual uniform consisted of chef whites and kitchen clogs. So at 2 in the afternoon, I went down to the hotel salon, where I had appointments for hair and makeup that I'd booked weeks ago when I'd still been trying to convince myself that attending was worth it, even if my family wouldn't be there. The stylist who did my hair was a woman named Claudia who had kind eyes and steady hands, and she swept my usually practical ponytail into an elegant updo with soft pieces framing my face, and the makeup artist named Tom created a look that made me feel sophisticated and polished without making me look like someone else entirely. Dramatic eyes and a nude lip that he said would photograph beautifully. Back in my room at 4:30, I carefully stepped into the gown I'd bought specifically for this night. A floor-length midnight blue silk dress with a fitted bodice and flowing skirt that had cost $680 at a boutique in Portland's Pearl District, the single most expensive piece of clothing I'd ever owned. More than double what I'd spent on my emerald dress for the grand opening, and initially I'd felt guilty about the price, but the boutique owner had looked at me seriously and said, "Buy the dress, you're investing in yourself." And so I had. At 5:30, I stood in front of the full-length mirror in the hotel room and barely recognized myself. The woman looking back at me was elegant and confident and successful, hair swept up to show the delicate silver earrings I'd inherited from my grandmother, the blue silk catching the light as I moved, makeup that made my eyes look larger and more defined, and I took a selfie with my phone and posted it to Instagram with the caption, "Ready for the Pacific Coast Dining Rising Star Chef Gala, honored to be nominated," followed by a star emoji. And I watched as the likes started coming in immediately, because my Instagram following had grown to 12,000 people now, a mix of food industry professionals and Portland locals and food enthusiasts who'd been following my journey. I checked my text messages one more time, that old habit of hoping, and there was nothing from my family, no good luck wishes, or acknowledgement that today was important. And I realized that right now, at this exact moment, they were probably getting ready for Amy's engagement party, which was happening tonight, at 7 o'clock at some event space in the Portland suburbs. My mother was probably fussing over flower arrangements, and my father was probably setting up whatever audiovisual equipment David had insisted they needed for a slideshow of Amy and Chris's relationship. And Amy was probably getting her hair done surrounded by her bridesmaids, and they were all together doing family things without me, and for the first time in my entire life, that realization didn't crush me. It just settled into a quiet acknowledgement of reality. I felt okay, Maybe more than okay, maybe actually free, because I was here in San Francisco about to attend a gala where I was nominated for a major award, and I was wearing a $680 dress, and I'd done this all myself, built this career and this recognition with my own hands and my own determination and my own refusal to give up, even when the people who were supposed to love me most couldn't be bothered to show up. At 6, I took the elevator down to the lobby, where a car I'd arranged was waiting to take me the 8 blocks to the Regency Ballroom, because I wasn't about to walk that distance in heels and a floor-length gown. And when I arrived at 6:15, the venue took my breath away with its crystal chandeliers and elegant round tables set for 10, and a stage with professional lighting and a podium. The whole space filled with 300 people who represented the food industry elite of the Pacific Coast. Chefs and restaurateurs, and food critics and journalists and sponsors, all dressed in tuxedos and gowns, all here to celebrate culinary excellence. I found my assigned table near the front of the room and saw that I was seated with the other 4 nominees and our guests. And Michael was already there waiting for me because he'd flown down from Portland that morning, and when he saw me, his face lit up and he stood to hug me and whispered, "You look like a star." And I felt tears threatening, but blinked them back because I'd just had my makeup done and I wasn't about to ruin it before the evening even started. The other nominees were already seated when I arrived at the table, and I felt a moment of intimidation looking at them because these were serious chefs with serious credentials, people who'd been in the industry longer than me and had already built impressive reputations. And I wondered briefly if I really belonged in this company, or if my nomination had been some kind of fluke. Thomas Chen from Seattle was 42 with 15 years of executive chef experience and 3 successful restaurants to his name. A tall man with kind eyes who stood when I approached and shook my hand warmly. And Marie Dubois from Vancouver was 38 and classically trained at Le Cordon Bleu in Paris, with stints in Michelin-starred restaurants across France, before opening her own place, elegant and poised in a black gown that probably cost more than my entire wardrobe. And Carlos Mendoza from San Francisco was 35 and known for his molecular gastronomy and avant-garde techniques, a protege of one of the most famous chefs in California. And Jessica Wu from San Diego was 33 and ran a fusion restaurant that was widely considered to be on track for a Michelin star. Her approach to combining Asian and Latin flavors earning her national attention. All of them were older, more experienced, more established, and I felt young and uncertain sitting among them in my midnight blue dress, with my small restaurant that had only been open for 2.5 months. But then Thomas leaned over and said, "I've been reading about you. The Portland press has been insane. That miso black cod sounds incredible. I'm planning a trip up just to try it." And Marie said, "I loved your magazine profile. Your journey from dishwasher to owner is genuinely inspiring. That's the kind of story that reminds us why we do this work." And I realized that these people, these accomplished chefs, were treating me as an equal, as a peer, as someone who deserved to be at this table with them. Dinner began at 6:45, and it was 5 courses, each one prepared by a previous Rising Star chef winner, because that was the tradition of this event, a way of honoring the award's history and showcasing the talent that had come before. And the food was exceptional, truly exceptional, but I could barely taste any of it because my nerves were jumping and my heart was pounding, and I kept thinking about the fact that in a few hours they were going to announce the winner, and it probably wouldn't be me. But what if it was? What if somehow, against all odds, they called my name? And between courses, the large video screens positioned around the ballroom showed profiles of each nominee, professionally produced segments with footage of our restaurants, and our cooking and interview clips. And when mine played, I saw my kitchen at Harvest Moon with its warm lighting and open design, saw myself plating the miso black cod with careful precision, heard my own voice saying, "I believe food is about connection, memory, and innovation in balance. I want every dish to tell a story." And the applause that followed was warm and genuine, and I felt Michael squeeze my hand under the table. After dinner, The awards presentation began with several categories being announced first. Best New Restaurant, which Harvest Moon wasn't eligible for because we were too new, and Restaurant Design and Best Pastry Chef, an Outstanding Wine Program, and Best New Bar. And each winner gave a brief speech and accepted their trophy, and the room applauded enthusiastically. And then Margaret Lawson walked onto the stage to present the final award of the evening, the Rising Star Chef Award, the most prestigious recognition of the night, and my mouth went dry and my hands started shaking, and I pressed them flat against my lap, hoping no one would notice. Margaret stood at the podium looking elegant and authoritative, and she began by describing the award's significance, how it had been given annually for 12 years, and how past winners included chefs who had gone on to win James Beard Awards and earn Michelin stars and open restaurant empires, how this award was specifically designed to recognize not just current achievement, but future potential, the chefs who were going to shape the industry for the next decade, and she said, "This year's 5 nominees represent the absolute future of Pacific Coast dining. Each one has demonstrated exceptional skill and innovation and promise." But one stood out to our panel of judges, a chef who in just 2 months of operation has transformed her city's dining scene, earned unanimous critical acclaim, and demonstrated a unique culinary voice that bridges cultures and traditions in exciting new ways. And I felt my heart hammering so hard, I thought everyone at the table must be able to hear it. Margaret continued, and her voice was strong and clear through the ballroom's sound system. This chef's journey from dishwasher to restaurant owner embodies the passion and perseverance that this award celebrates. Her commitment to local sourcing and sustainable practices reflects the values our industry needs. Her innovative fusion approach creates something genuinely new while honoring tradition, and her instant impact on her community demonstrates the kind of influence that marks a true rising star. And I couldn't breathe, literally could not take a full breath. And beside me, Michael had gone completely still, and at the table, Thomas and Marie and Carlos and Jessica were all sitting forward in their chairs. And Margaret smiled and said, "The 2023 Pacific Coast Dining Rising Star Chef is Rebecca Chen of Harvest Moon in Portland." And the room erupted in applause, and I sat completely frozen for 3 full seconds, unable to process that she had just said my name, that I had actually won, that out of 5 incredibly talented chefs they had chosen me. And then Michael was pulling me up out of my chair and hugging me hard, and the other nominees at my table were standing and clapping, and Thomas shook my hand and said, "Congratulations. This is so well deserved." And Marie kissed both my cheeks, and Jessica hugged me, and Carlos clapped my shoulder, all of them genuinely happy for me. No resentment or disappointment visible on any of their faces, just professional respect and authentic joy. And I walked toward the stage on legs that were shaking so badly I was amazed I didn't fall. And the applause continued as I climbed the 3 steps up to the platform, where Margaret waited with a crystal trophy in one hand and an oversized check for $25,000 in the other. The photographer positioned us for photos, Margaret and me holding the trophy together, then me alone with both the trophy and the check. And the crystal was heavy and cool in my hands, and the check had my name printed on it, Rebecca Chen, and the amount, $25,000. And it felt surreal, like I was watching this happen to someone else. And then Margaret stepped back and handed me the microphone for my acceptance speech, and I realized with a jolt of panic that I hadn't prepared anything because I genuinely hadn't believed I would win, had assumed that one of the more established chefs with more experience and more credentials would take this award and I would just be honored to have been nominated. And now I was standing on stage in front of 300 of the most influential people in Pacific Coast food industry with a microphone in my hand and absolutely no idea what to say. And I looked out at all those faces watching me expectantly, and I took a breath and decided to just tell the truth. "I didn't prepare a speech because I honestly didn't think I'd win," I said into the microphone, and my voice came out steadier than I expected, considering my hands were shaking so badly I had to grip the crystal trophy with both palms to keep it from slipping, and warm laughter rippled through the ballroom. 300 people responding to my honesty with genuine warmth, and I felt something loosen in my chest. I've been a professional chef for 12 years, and a cook for longer than that. I started washing dishes at 20 years old because I needed money and because I loved being around food, loved the energy of kitchens and the alchemy of transforming raw ingredients into something that could bring people joy. And I worked every station, every shift, learning from everyone who would teach me. And I saved money for a decade to open Harvest Moon, living in a studio apartment and skipping vacations and saying no to everything that wasn't moving me toward my dream. And 2 months ago, I finally opened the doors to my restaurant. I paused and looked out at the faces watching me, some nodding, some smiling, all of them listening, really listening, and my voice grew stronger. I invited everyone I loved to the grand opening. I sent formal invitations and made personal phone calls and reserved the best table in the house. And most of the people I invited came. They showed up and celebrated with me and recognized what that night meant. But some of the most important people didn't come. The people whose approval I'd been chasing my entire life chose to be somewhere else that night. And standing in my dream restaurant surrounded by success, I felt their absence like a physical weight. I saw Margaret in the front row nodding encouragingly, and several chefs at nearby tables leaning forward, and I realized I was telling a story that many of them understood, the story of having to choose yourself when the people who are supposed to love you won't. For most of my life, I worked for approval from people who never saw my worth. I achieved things and earned recognition and built a career and kept hoping that the next accomplishment would finally be enough to make them see me, really see me. But tonight I'm standing here with this award in front of this community, and I realize something that maybe I should have understood years ago. I don't need approval from people who choose not to see me. I have something so much better. I have respect from people who understand the work, the craft, the dedication it takes to do what we do. The room was completely silent now, everyone focused on my words, and I felt tears threatening but pushed through. This award represents more than professional recognition to me. It represents the power of believing in yourself when others don't. It represents the family you build when the family you're born into can't show up. It represents mentors and colleagues and supporters who see your worth and celebrate it. My mentor Michael Torres is here tonight. He's been in my corner for 12 years. He taught me how to trust my instincts and refine my technique and believe I deserved a seat at this table. That's family. That's what showing up looks like. I saw Michael wiping his eyes and felt my own tears finally spill over, but I didn't care. This was truth, and it mattered. To young chefs out there, especially those who feel unseen or dismissed, or like they have to prove themselves to people who will never be satisfied, I want you to hear this. Your worth isn't determined by who shows up. It's determined by the quality of your work, the integrity of your effort, and your commitment to your craft. Keep cooking, keep creating, keep believing in your vision. The right people will notice. The people who matter will see you, and one day you'll realize that you were always enough. You just needed to find your people. I raised the crystal trophy high, and my voice rang clear through the ballroom. Thank you to Pacific Coast Dining Magazine and Margaret Lawson for this incredible honor. Thank you to the judges who saw something in me and my work. Thank you to my incredible team at Harvest Moon who make magic happen every single night. Thank you to Portland's food community for embracing me and supporting me. And thank you to everyone who has believed in me and shown up for me. This is without question the best night of my life. The applause that erupted was thunderous, people standing. And as I walked off the stage, chefs I'd admired for years were reaching out to shake my hand and hug me. Thomas Chen gripped my shoulder and said, "That was the most honest speech I've ever heard at one of these things." And Marie Dubois kissed both my cheeks and whispered, "You made us all remember why we started." And the rest of the evening dissolved into a beautiful blur of congratulations and photos and conversations with industry legends who treated me like a peer, like someone who belonged. and champagne flowed and connections were made, and around 10 o'clock my phone buzzed in my small evening clutch, and I pulled it out to see a text from my cousin Jennifer that said, "Becca, you won! It's all over social media, congratulations!" And then a text from Amy that just said, "You won some award?" With no congratulations, no acknowledgement of what this meant, just a question mark. And then my mother's text arrived. "We saw on Facebook you won an award. That's wonderful. Amy's party was beautiful. You missed a lovely night." As if the two events were equivalent. As if my winning a major culinary award was just something that happened while they were busy with the real family celebration. I read those messages standing in the middle of the Regency ballroom surrounded by my community, my people, my world, and I felt absolutely nothing. No hurt, no anger, no desperate wish that they could see me. Just a quiet certainty settling into my bones, and I deleted both messages without responding and looked around at the celebration happening around me. Chefs and critics and colleagues who had celebrated my win like it mattered, because to them it did matter. And I pulled up the group text with my restaurant team and typed, "We won Rising Star Chef. Celebration Monday, champagne on me." And their responses flooded in immediately. Marcus sent 3 fire emojis and, "Chef! I knew it." Yasmin sent hearts and, "So proud to work with you." James sent, "You're a star, boss, always knew it." And the line cooks and servers all chimed in with joy and pride and excitement. These people who showed up for me every single day, who believed in my vision and worked to make it real. This was my family. These were my people. Later that night, Michael and I sat at the hotel bar with our crystal trophies on the polished wood between us, mine significantly larger than his drink, and he raised his glass of 18-year-old scotch and said, "To Becca, the star who always was. Now everyone knows it." And I touched my champagne flute to his glass and felt peace settling over me like a warm blanket. The kind of peace that comes from finally understanding something fundamental about yourself and your worth. I slept that night in my $425 hotel room with the crystal trophy on the nightstand, catching the light from the city outside, and for the first time in months, maybe years, maybe ever, I felt completely peaceful, completely whole, completely enough, because the right people had showed up, the people who mattered had seen me, and I finally understood with absolute clarity that I had always been enough, I had always been worthy, I had always deserved to be celebrated. I just needed to stop asking for validation from people who were never going to give it and start accepting it from the people who had been offering it all along.